All right, we're going to get started doing a little recording of the Finding Your Identity podcast. This is going to be episode 10. It's going to be jam-packed full of fun. Everybody better buckle up and sit down with your tray tables up and stuff. Okay. That's enough fooling around. Seriously, stop fooling around. It's about to get serious because this is episode 10. It's important because it's a round number. And it's the 10th of something. So it's meaningful. So, let's go. Hello, and welcome again to another episode of Finding Your Identity. And this is going to be episode 10, so it's going to be jam-packed full of fun. So hang on and get ready for the ride. All right. That's just the intro for episode 10. And of course, a story. This episode is going to be all about side hustles, and there are a ton of them. There's a lot of things you can do on the side as a side job, a second job, a side hustle, what have you. There's tons of names for it, but as you've heard in previous podcasts, I've had my share of side hustles, and of course, I'm going to cover eBay in this one, among others. But for my intro story, I wanted to get into a little of the background that I had when I was cleaning houses with my grandmother, because she cleaned houses for very wealthy people. And it always led to some interesting experiences. There's, a ton of stories I could spit off the top of my head from that experience, in my own experience and her experience, because there's just a lot of interesting things that happen when you're working for wealthy people and things you learn about. But there was a couple times when I was cleaning houses that I had some, I guess you could say, like, interesting experiences with some of the characters that you meet along the way. But kind of some background: when I was younger, and I want to say I was maybe 10 or 11, and my grandmother, said, "You want to come work with me and help clean some houses? I'll teach you how to do some cleaning." And I said, "Sure, why not?" And she's like, "Oh, and I'll give you $25 an hour." And I'm like, "Okay." Like, how many hours are we talking here? And she said, at least 4 hours. Sometimes it's like 6 hours. And so I remember going, and that's back as far as I can remember. I think she said she had brought me a couple times when I was younger. I probably was a baby sometimes when she might have just been, working with my mother, because it seemed at some point or another, many members of my family went to work with my grandmother to help clean houses well before I was born. And it was always, just an extra side hustle for these other people to make some extra money. And it was decent money. I mean, she was getting paid a lot. I mean, I think she was getting, I think when she actually retired, she was making $100 an hour, cleaning houses for this one lady that, basically didn't want to lose her, so just kept offering to pay her more per hour. And, to the number of 100, $100 an hour, that was the number that got my grandmother to stick around. But, it was always interesting, just because, you're in somebody else's house and you're working for somebody else. Um, and so you never really know like what to expect. And I didn't remember running into any of the owners of these houses very often, except for when my grandmother retired and I took over for her for this one lady, and I got fired in an unusual manner. I was in college and I was finishing up college and I knew I couldn't continue with it, but the phone call was just kind of a bizarre one where she essentially called me up and said, I've changed my perspective or something to that effect for how I wish to run the house going forward, which essentially to me meant that she was looking for a maid to travel with her when they came up from New York to Connecticut. So, I wasn't about to live with them. So I'm like, yeah, no, I understand. And it was, good while it lasted. I think at the time, I think I was making $50 an hour doing that. So that was a pretty sweet side hustle. At $50 an hour, it's a lot. And when you're cleaning the houses, you're potentially working about 6 hours. These houses were huge. I mean, the house I was cleaning was 12,000 square feet. So it would take a while. It was 12,000 square feet of a lot of space, but there was still several rooms. There was like a full gym in the basement, and the house had an addition which was essentially an entire other house, which was for their guests, like a guest house that was attached. They had like a game room that had like pool table and foosball and stuff like that, which then went into the other house, which is a whole nother house. So sometimes I had to clean that, sometimes I didn't, because it depended if they had anyone come up and stay in that. But anyways, it was always interesting. That was actually the same people that they owned another house. They had bought this house, but they owned this other house that had a little apple orchard. And I remember I'd work with my grandmother, and we'd finish up cleaning the house, and she'd say, "Okay, go pick out some apples, and I'll use them to make an apple pie tonight." And so that was cool, because you could go essentially pick whatever apples you wanted. I mean, I'd go pick 10, 12 apples. She's like, pick some to take home, because they essentially would just go bad, because they'd end up falling off the tree and rotting. So the owner encouraged people to pick the apples when they were there. So my grandmother would always tell me to go pick them, and it was always nice because we'd get our fresh apples, then go home and we'd make an apple pie, or she'd bake an apple pie, and I'd be picking at the apples as they were covered in cinnamon and sugar, and just so sweet. But they had that was behind their like pool house. That was kind of I guess that was a little bit smaller of a house, but still a pretty big house. I mean, I want to say it had like 5 bedrooms and probably 5 bathrooms. And it was kind of an interesting shape, because it had like a silo in the kind of in the center of the house. I don't know, doing a terrible job trying to describe this house, explain what it looks like. But anyways, so that was just one of them that I remember working for. And there was this other house that I remember my grandmother had brought me to, because sometimes it was extra money, but I would try to help her like a couple days during the week, and this was during the summertime when I was out of school. So I'd be I'd spend the night for a couple days, and like she'd have different houses she cleaned on different days. I think there was only one house that she'd actually go back to, twice in a week. And that was the house where they were paying her $100 an hour. But they just had like higher demands for for the cleaning, because it was a big house, and there were two people that were living there full time. Most of the other houses that I would help clean were second houses, country houses. These people lived in New York and then came up for the weekend, so they weren't occupied when we would clean them. But it made me think of one of the weird stories that she told me about a couple that were kind of odd. I remember actually meeting these people one time when I was cleaning this house, and this house was pretty decent sized house, but it actually, I think it took us generally speaking 4 to 5 hours to clean this one. It didn't take quite as long to do the other house, and 4 to 5 hours was doing like pretty thorough cleaning. Like sometimes if they didn't come up, it was really just dusting, vacuuming the floors, and kind of doing less of a thorough job because they hadn't come up. Because a lot of what the work was you first get there, and it was like get all the laundry started, which meant go strip all the beds that people slept in, get the laundry going. My job was always vacuuming. That's how I'd essentially that's how I'd spend most of my time, was doing the vacuuming, and then I get to a point where I'd have to maybe help with like folding the laundry, putting stuff away. But that was like really what my grandmother would do. She would just be she'd get all the laundry started, and then she'd start scrubbing like the sinks and toilets and bathtubs, and if I finished vacuuming sooner, then I'd have to go find a bathroom that still needed to be done, and I'd work on those. Sometimes there'd be rooms where she had to do some dusting or polishing, like with wood polish, some of the wood furniture or dressers or something, so I'd be kind of trying to work to catch up to her for the room, because we'd kind of both take care of doing the polishing and then vacuuming. But anyway, so she had told me this story of this one house, because I wasn't actually there at the time, but she told me that they came in for the weekend really quick and kind of unexpected, and they called her up and they said, sorry, we had to leave in a rush. Would you be able to go up and clean up after us? It's kind of a mess. I hope you don't mind. We'll pay you extra. She's like, certainly, I'll go up there. That's no problem. And so she goes up there, and she goes into their master bedroom, and she she finds it's a mess, but not the kind of mess that you would expect, because there were things out, apparatuses that were out that were for bedroom activities, and there was a plate of Jell-O on the bed, and then she looked up and she noticed that there was Jell-O stuck to the ceiling. There was some lacy lingerie laying around, and she had really no clue what was going on, because she told me this after, and she's like, what could they possibly have been thinking? Why would they throw Jell-O at the ceiling? And like, what were they doing with these things? As she described, like, these long objects that you turn on, and it was battery powered, and sweet and innocent grandmother trying to describe something like that was just, man, my head was exploding, and I was just cracking up, just thinking, wow, man, you're lucky you don't have the internet, or you don't care about the internet, because if you started Googling this stuff, you'd be in trouble. I'll tell you. But it was just really funny to me, and it's like, and of course I can't really even, well, I do know their last names of the people, but I obviously can't say that. But it was just funny, because it was just one of those, stories that she had told me, and I just thought, wow, there's some interesting people, and there was definitely some very bizarre people that I had met occasionally, There were some that were very interesting. There was this guy who was a doctor. I remember, like, I used to clean his house, and he had very ornate Spanish architecture in his house, and his place was a pretty cool place to clean, although it was really dated, like really like straight out of like the 70s, maybe late 60s, early 70s, and the Spanish architecture and these shag kind of dark yellow rugs, but it definitely was interesting. But he was such a nice guy, he's always asking how I was and wanted to know, how I was doing in school, and so I'd generally chat with him for a few minutes sometimes, because he would sometimes be in town, and he didn't make it awkward at all to be cleaning. Like sometimes, some of these other places, if there was somebody who was in town, they'd leave because they just thought it was awkward just standing around watching somebody clean their house. But this guy was cool, and like he'd talk, and I'd be dusting or something like that, and I was able to have a conversation with him. And he was a world-renowned doctor in something, I want to say he was a foot doctor or something with podiatry or maybe orthopedics, but yeah, anyways, that's my story for today, and that's my side hustle story. And I have more stories related to when I was cleaning houses, but I'll save those for other episodes. But I'm gonna jump into this jam-packed episode about side hustles in a minute. In a minute. No, not that again. Don't do that again, buddy. Don't be crazy, man. Come on. Come on. All right, get into this episode. Welcome back to Finding Your Identity. This is episode 10. That means we made it to 10 so far. If you follow math correctly, if you're a mathematician, you can figure out, if you count the other episodes that have been released so far, this is 10. I'm not lying. I did the math before this with pencil. And this episode is going to be about side hustles, and I'm going to try to get into some details because I think it's very interesting when you think about side hustles that are available today. Actually, I'll start with side hustles that I did when I was a kid, because I've always been hustling. I feel like I've always been hustling to do something to make a little bit of extra cash. As I told in my story, starting when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, I was doing cleaning with my grandmother for rich people, making $25 an hour at minimum. And that was my first side hustle that I did. But one of the other ones that I used to do, which I think is your quintessential side hustle when you're, early teens, is shoveling driveways or mowing lawns. I didn't actually mow lawns. I did mow lawns for my grandfather, as I would do during the summertime. I'd help him. Again, I would be going to my grandparents' house and staying there. So sometimes I'd go to work with my grandmother to clean houses, and other times I'd go to work with my grandfather to help him mow lawns, because I'd run the string trimmer or weed whacker, or I'd have to run the small mower to get into to areas where he couldn't get with the larger mower. So I was doing that. I also, as I mentioned in the previous episode, worked on the farm, which was technically a side hustle. But when I was growing up, it was easy to go out during a snowstorm and just show up at someone's door and say, do you want me to shovel your driveway for $20? Which in hindsight was a freaking steal. But, I'd go out there and I would shovel driveways for hours. I remember once there was this one big storm. I think we got at least 1.5 to 2 feet of snow, and it was, it was a perfect opportunity. But holy crap, that was a long day, because we went out there. I think this was the day after, and it had snowed through the night. And we went out first thing in the morning, like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. We were out there, and we'd start hitting up some of our elderly neighbors that we knew were awake and ask them if we wanted to shovel, because it was, it was just nicer. And we'd say, okay, $20 will do your driveway, or $10 will do your front steps and your sidewalk. But essentially it was just doing some kind of shoveling of something on their property. And we'd get that $20. Sometimes we'd even get like a tip at the end. We'd get an extra $5 from somebody if they were nice. Then there were times where it was like we had to be, do it perfectly. So we'd be told that, we needed to make sure that we gave, 2 feet extra on each side of the driveway, like into the grass, like, which was kind of nuts. And, we just avoided that house the next time around. But I just remember we were out there and we did a ton of houses. I think we walked away, because we'd say, it'd be $20, right? So it was $10 a piece for two of us going out there. So we'd have to do at least 10 houses to make $100. But, I want to say we did 20 houses during that storm. Some of them were easier than others. Some of them were on slopes. Some of them weren't directly in the sun, so it hadn't like kind of melted down and made the snow a little bit thicker. So we would be out there and we'd be shoveling the snow, and we made probably close to $200 total. So we each walked away with $100 versus us, only making $100 total. But that was great. Like, that was a great takeaway. But we had to pay for our music albums, games, any kind of games, video games that we wanted at the time. But I think essentially that was like one of the main side hustles when I was at that age. So I think that the little hustles like that, like shoveling snow, mowing lawns, that's great when you're a kid. But, I think people want to know what to do now. So let me get to the meat of this. I'll jump right into eBay or Amazon, because I did it for a year, and, I was successful enough at it to, make enough extra money while I was in college that it seemed to work out. But quickly realized that it wasn't really going to be an effective means of income. So that was that 10 years ago, I think? Yeah, somewhere around that. It was in 2008. Yeah, what are we in? 2019? Yeah, about 10 years. Let's just say. So things have changed. And I started to kind of like really think about how to kind of present this, because it's a side hustle. It's, I don't want to give people the wrong information, but it's never certain or guaranteed. And I think part of it is why people do it as something on the side, because they have full-time jobs, and it's really just meant to be supplemental income. So that's my disclaimer, that it's, something that I would encourage people to research and look into before starting, but they could use this for supplemental income. And, eBay, looking at this site, webretailer.com, they have some survey and statistical information, and they say that 34.3% of eBay sellers make under $10,000 per year, whereas I guess on compared to Amazon, it's 9% or 9% of Amazon sellers are making less than $10,000 per year. So that could be that, if you think about it, it's signaling that Amazon might be the better place to sell. I can't say that. I have empirical evidence to prove that, but I would say that it's probably safe to say that you should be distributing your selling between those sites, mainly because you don't want to get stuck selling on one platform versus the other, and have it turn out that something happens with that one channel of selling, and you don't have a backup, or you don't have a way to distribute your sales, divide your sales, just say, distribute them evenly between a couple different platforms. I'd even go to the extent of saying, if you can sell this stuff through Etsy, if you can build your own website and also sell through there, and create a network of distributing your products that way. I think one of the mistakes that I made was I relied, too heavily on eBay, and I had problems where I got my account suspended for stupid reasons, and then my income stream was cut off, and I'd be in trouble for however long I was suspended. Sometimes it was like a 3-day suspension. There were other times where I had no idea how long the suspension was going to last, because I had to have my account re-reviewed. And I did use that as kind of a reason for me to think that I needed to go out and build my own website, and the story about that, which turned out to be a mistake, but only because I just didn't, I guess, do enough research or plan well enough to actually hire the right company to give me what I really needed. So I'd say, though, that as a side hustle, selling on eBay or Amazon is potentially a good option. Now, I did find somebody who had some information about how they were leveraging eBay to sell products. They actually talked about a good strategy, which, in this day and age is really what you need in order to be successful when you're selling online. Is you need a good strategy, because so many people are doing it. They make note of leveraging arbitrage, which is buying low, selling high. They do it in the stock market all the time. It's done frequently with currency trading, where you're basically trying to buy, the US dollar when it's at a certain value that's higher than the euro or something like that. But, when you're making that purchase, there's these small differences in between the values, and you're making your profits off of those small values. When it comes to selling products, it's essentially finding it for $50 and selling it for $100, which is an extreme example, but that's what, working arbitrage is like. And this guy had mentioned that what he did was he actually was buying products from Walmart and Target and Best Buy that were items that were in the clearance section, and taking the clearance items and then turning around and flipping them and selling them on eBay, and making a decent profit. Another method that people could use, and this is just me kind of coming off the top of my head as I'm thinking about it, is potentially you might find something at a consignment shop, because he does mention that he found this vintage jacket that was Ralph Lauren that he bought for $15 and sold for almost $2,000. Now imagine that. I mean, that's a huge profit margin there. It's not common. That's a rare find, but there might be an opportunity to find something at a consignment shop. Some people go tag sailing. I have cousins that actually go and find, antique type items and, vintage type items, and they resell through Etsy or a website, which I actually incidentally built them. But they sell things that are, quote unquote vintage, and they make a decent profit margin off of it. Because you could find something for $5 at an antique, at a tag sale, call it antique, turn around and sell it for $50 online. You never know what people's tastes are going to be. So you got to kind of get out there and give it a try. Now, segueing into Etsy, Etsy, it's hard to find the actual numbers about how much people are actually making, specifically on Etsy. But I did see, some numbers regarding how much it's going to end up costing you, I guess per item. So it costs 20 cents to publish a listing. And then once it's sold, there's a 5% transaction fee. So, you got to kind of do the math out. I had a spreadsheet that I had put together on eBay, because eBay, again, same thing, and Amazon, is you're going to have fees that are associated. You're going to have the fee to potentially pay when you list it. You're going to have a fee if it sells. Generally, it's a percentage of what the sale price is. Then you got a fee for handling the payment processing. So if it's PayPal, it's about 3%. So you got to kind of add all this stuff up. You pay $10 for the item, then you got to back out all these costs and figure to make any profit, you need to sell that thing for like $25 to walk away with a $5 profit or something to that effect. That number is really rough. But you kind of get the idea that you start thinking, if I'm going to sell on eBay, yeah, I can buy something for $10, but I really do need to sell it for $25 to $30 to make any kind of profit, to make it worth it. And that's if you are finding it that it's not super heavy and you can get away with shipping it for cheap. Like I, with my eBay business, was able to ship items for $1.25 or $1.35 or whatever it was, because I was under the 13 ounces, so I could send it first class mail, and that was still getting it delivered within 2 to 3 days, depending on the location. If it was Hawaii, I think it was 5, or Alaska. But you got to also figure out how are you going to handle shipping. You got to put together a little manufacturing assembly line, or whatever you want to call it, for packaging stuff up, like I did. Because if you're selling a lot of little products, you're most likely going to be shipping a lot of little products every day. So, you got to figure out what you can do as pre-work to get stuff packaged up ahead of time so that it's ready to go. And all you got to do is slap a shipping label on it and send it out the door. But, Etsy is known for, selling like handmade things or vintage things, and the way that their reputation has been built up, they kind of help promote your stuff, because somebody might actually go onto Etsy looking for handmade jewelry, and they may not Google it, Google being so synonymous with search, they may search it through Etsy. So it's directly through Etsy's website. It's through their search engine built into their website. It'll search through the listings, it'll search through all the stores, and it may come up with handmade jewelry at 20 different locations, and then you can filter. Maybe you want something close because maybe that person has a retail shop nearby, or you're thinking, I don't want to pay so much for shipping. It'd be nice if they're in the same state as me or same region. Or, it just might be so hard to find that you don't mind paying the extra shipping for it. But, either way, it's just one of those things that, you're leveraging a platform to kind of help you. Like eBay and Amazon and Etsy, they're all major, well-known platforms, so they're going to help you from that perspective. But you're going to pay for it, because you're going to end up having to fork over transaction fees, listing fees, payment processing fees. All that stuff has to be factored in. So if you're going to have that eBay business or that Amazon business or Etsy business, you really got to kind of do the math out to find out what's your break-even point, and at what point does it make it profitable when you think of it, when it's compounded amongst a lot of items that you're trying to sell, because you really need to make it worthwhile. You really need enough items to sell consistently to make it regular income, unless you're just trying to get rid of crap from your basement or your attic. And then you just go on eBay, then you really don't care what you're selling it for because you're just happy to get rid of it. But if you're trying to make a business out of it, you really got to consider how much it's going to cost you to handle that product and to ship that product, and then you got to get paid, and how much it's going to cost to pay the payment processing vendor. So all these things you need to consider. So next, the biggest common, most well-known side hustle that's come into light in the past couple of years is Uber or Lyft, but essentially these ride-sharing services where regular people can say, I've got a car and I've got some time, I'm going to drive people around to where they need to go, and you've got the Ubers and the Lyfts that are actually providing that platform, again, similar to eBay and Etsy, where it's established. It's so you don't have to deal with the marketing aspect of it, but there are some things you need to recognize about it. I mean, first you have to pass a background check if you're going to be a driver. Actually, I'd say first you need a driver's license. Second, you need a car, and it needs to be somewhat reliable, and it needs to be something that you're willing to put miles on and increase your regular maintenance visits, because it's now become a tool of your trade. So you got to factor that in. So if you think you're going to go buy a brand new car to go do this, you got to really do the math out and figure out if it's worth it, because it may not be, because there's, I think there's some standards that you have to meet in order to drive. You can't have the hoopty, the rusted Pinto or whatever old car you can remember from when you were young, or that brown station wagon with the panel sides. You can't really operate in something that's not safe, let's say, that doesn't have seatbelts. It needs to have seatbelts. It needs to meet all the safety standards, pass inspection and emissions and all that fun stuff. But say you've just got a car and you're like, hey, you know what? I work full time. I've got a decent car. I want to do this as a side gig. Now, looking into what they're providing, what information you can find on their websites, they claim that Uber drivers take home about $25 an hour, and Lyft drivers can make as much as $35 an hour. There's obviously a similar transaction fee associated with it, which they call a booking fee, that, both Lyft and Uber take different amounts of the booking fee, but they claim they don't take more than a 25% commission, although that's been somewhat disproven according to some of the drivers. So again, you kind of have to balance it out. But if you think, you're going to average about $20 an hour, that's kind of how you can use that as a benchmark. Although there is one reference to a survey they did in 2015 that said that some people were only making about $8 or $9 an hour in a big city like Detroit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's everywhere. And there are different factors involved, because there's surge pricing, which I believe both Uber and Lyft charge, and they do that based on the increased demand. So if all of a sudden there's a big spike in demand, they are going to up their costs, or the cost to get a ride, which is directly reflected in how much the Uber driver will make. I actually saw something that said that there were Uber drivers in a particular area who were all in cahoots with each other, that were all essentially waiting close by for a signal to turn off their apps to say that they were unavailable to drive. And then that was actually causing the surge pricing to kick in because there was less cars and more people. So that was triggering like the algorithm. And then somebody, one person was watching on it and saw the price get up to a certain amount, and then everyone turned it back on and then started going out to collect fares, and they were getting, they were gaming the system to actually make more for the fares per fare. And, I think that's only going to last for so long for you. So I wouldn't rely on that. I try to figure out what your average amount is, but let's just say that it is between $20 and $30 an hour. You can kind of do your math out to figure out if it's worth it. If you're working 9 to 5, that means you're going to have to be driving, potentially 6 to who knows what time you decide you want to go to bed, and be home. But let's just say it's 6 to 10. So there's that 4-hour window, right? And you're making, let's just say you're making the $20 an hour, right? Like it's only $80. Like that's not a lot of money, I guess, but it's $80 extra you made in that one day. I guess, if you compound that, you do that 2 days a week, now that's $160. So maybe that's worth it. I'm just providing the information. I'm not suggesting that you do this, but, it's an interesting side hustle that's out there. There's also, many businesses popping up now around delivery services because Amazon has gotten so big with, having the facilities closer and closer to people. Like they're distributing their distribution centers across the country in a manner that allows people to have a side hustle now where they actually deliver Amazon packages. So, looking at that one, you can actually make somewhere between $14 an hour to $25 an hour. And it seems that, that one's going to be a little bit better and more efficiently planned out, I should say, because Amazon's really good with how they kind of can provide tools for you. So essentially, you'd be at your central package office and you'd pick up your series of packages, your set of packages for the day, and you'd be, getting ready to deliver, and you'd essentially get a map and a guidance route of what's the most efficient way to deliver that, so you don't backtrack. I mean, this is what UPS and FedEx have been doing for many years, is they've been essentially cutting down the amount of backtracking that a delivery driver would have to do, so that you're not wasting gas, you're not wasting time, you're operating more efficiently. So imagining that Amazon does do something like that, you figure you're probably staying within a 50-mile radius. I'm just kind of saying this off the top of my head. I'm kind of guessing. I did look up the facts specifically. It does say between $14 to $26 an hour is the average range that you're going to make in terms of your hourly rate pay, and that you can expect to make about $33,000 a year as an Amazon delivery driver. But in terms of other costs that you really have to calculate, like the wear and tear on your car and then gas and stuff like that, I'm speculating that if it's within the 50-mile radius, you're probably not driving more than at least 50 miles one way, during one day. So you kind of do your math out, whatever that works out to be at what is it now, $4 a gallon where I am for gas. I don't know, depends on where you are, but you got to kind of weigh that stuff out, because that $33,000 a year is only going to be specific to the salary you're making and not covering the costs. So of course, when you got to factor in the costs, you got to do the math out to figure out if it's worth it for you. Take-Two. So, of course, when it comes to having these extra expenses and these costs, for whatever side hustle you're thinking about working on, but specifically with doing deliveries, you got to figure it out. Is it worth it? You got to do the math out. Same as if you're looking to sell something online. Is the extra added expenses that are on top of the cost of doing business, is it worth it for you? So these are things you got to consider. Now, in the same vein as deliveries, Amazon deliveries, which, by the way, it's interesting now. You see all the people that are delivering in rented trucks. So that's also something else that you should factor in, because potentially you don't want to wear down your car, but how much are you willing to spend extra for an enterprise van or something to that effect, so that you can make your deliveries, so that's one option. Now, the other type of delivery service is DoorDash or Uber Eats, where you're delivering food. You're not necessarily delivering packages from Amazon, but you decide that maybe that's the side hustle you want to work. Now, straight off of DoorDash's website, they have information that says, hey, if you want to earn extra cash, maybe during the busy holiday season, take advantage of people ordering in more than usual, and you can just pick a preferred day and list what type of hours you want to work, what are the number of hours you want to work, and you can earn up to $25 an hour doing food deliveries. Now, they even go to the extent to say, hey, if you don't have a car, we don't care if you use a bicycle or you walk or use a scooter or a motorcycle. They just want you to deliver food for them. Now, one of the big differences, though, with food delivery is you have to go to the restaurant, pick it up, and then go to the customer's house, and that's one order. So it's going to be a lot harder to plan out some kind of efficient route. So you can't exactly plan your day accordingly, but on the flip side of that, you're generally going to be within your town, or if you happen to drive to another town because they have more options for doing delivery, you're probably, generally speaking, going to be in one area that's probably within a 10 to 15 mile radius is my guess. So you would be spending, less gas, theoretically, be a little less wear and tear on your vehicle, or scooter or bicycle, if that's your preference. I guess if you're living in a city, that could be practical. I guess if you're living in a city, it could be practical to walk. I mean, they say, hey, you could even walk too. That's an option. And since that's the business that they're in, I'm kind of surprised Amazon doesn't offer this, but I didn't dig in further into this subject. But DoorDash provides this information up front, but they offer, auto liability insurance, and they have, driver protection. They even say that Dashers are protected from rude or threatening customers by their employment policy. Any unruly behavior, bodily injury, or threat that's promptly reported back to DoorDash is swiftly and responsibly dealt with in accordance with local laws. Doesn't necessarily mean anything is going to happen, but they have a policy written down, right? So that makes it real. But that's potentially something that could give you comfort in knowing that maybe is a side hustle for you. Now, granted, in a scenario where you're doing the delivery for DoorDash, or you're doing Amazon deliveries, or you're driving for Uber or Lyft, like, your cut of the big pie is going to be a lot less. So, selling on Etsy or eBay or Amazon, your own products under your own, marketing plan and product delivery plan and whatnot, you'll be able to yield better efficiencies in that business and potentially make more profit, and probably get a lot more of the profits to yourself because you're controlling a lot more of the pipeline, let's call it. Whereas when you consider Amazon has done a lot of the leg work for you, well, pretty much all the leg work for you, figuratively speaking, because, all you are doing for them is the literal legwork for them, where you're taking the product that they've already marketed and sold and gotten through their distribution channels into a facility, and then you're just taking it the final steps to get it to the customer's door. So you're a little bit smaller piece of the puzzle there. So of course you're not going to be making as much of the piece of the pie, to try and keep running with this pun or metaphor. But, so you got to consider that as a factor too. But it's easier to get into, the cost of the barrier to entry. That's the word I was looking for. The barrier to entry is lower for something like that because there's so much established ahead of it that you don't have to, you just basically need to apply and meet the minimum requirements, and then you're up and running. You're trying to go out and start an eBay business or an Etsy business, and there's going to be a higher barrier to entry there because that's, there's going to be a lot more work that you need to put in order to make that happen and make that work. So those are all things to consider. Uber Eats has similar availability. Obviously, that's through Uber, same one that does the delivery. Maybe you could work it out so that you're driving Uber and doing Uber Eats. So, you've kind of split your side hustle. You've got two of the side hustle factors going on for you. Maybe that could work out for you. So you could be driving people around, and when it's slow, you can be doing food deliveries. Who knows? I mean, that could be an option. So everything's up for consideration in the side hustle business. You could go open a lemonade stand for all I care. Like that, maybe that's an option. I mean, it worked when you were a kid if you did that kind of stuff. I shoveled driveways. I didn't have a lemonade stand, but that might have worked. Might have been smarter because then I wouldn't have had to go anywhere and walk so much, although I probably would have drank all the profits. So actually, the last side hustle that I wanted to mention was a t-shirt business. And, this is one of those kind of somewhat older, been around longer type of businesses. And you gotta like put a lot of thought into this one though, because I think you could do it really wrong and not get anywhere, and then you end up with a lot of inventory that just is useless. Which is probably my first bit of advice, is to find a way to test your ideas, because you got to consider that with a t-shirt business, you really do need to put some thought into the t-shirt designs. It feels like that's the first step, and looking online, I came across like kind of some top level categories for deciding, how you're going to operate a t-shirt business. And you've got design, quality, brand, and inventory. And those are the focus points. And I'd say design is the biggest one, but you could maybe get by with some crappy designs, and even, to some degree, like the quality doesn't have to be super great. Like I've gotten t-shirts that only lasted like a few months, and then the letters started falling off, although it was probably a thought like I'd never go back, but they're probably t-shirts that I got from some event or something like that. So quality is up there, like if you could think things out, you think, okay, I can make clever sentences. I could put words together very cleverly. So I'm going to, make a t-shirt business where I sell catchphrases or something. You got to pick a vendor, which can be tricky because it can get expensive, and you got to consider that everything that you put in initially is going to be taken away from your profit margin. So you have to consider all that again, and that's just getting the product made. You're coming up with the design, and then you're getting this product made, and now you've got a physical t-shirt in hand, or 20 that you're going to sell. You got to figure out, oh, maybe you're going to sell through Etsy, maybe you can sell it through eBay. Most likely you're going to be better off trying to sell it through your own personal website, t-shirt business website. So you got to put effort into building something. Maybe you can do a point and click type of website building platform setup or whatever, like Wix, WIX, which I know people have done. I mean, you just need to get a basic website out with the shopping cart layout and be able to add items to the cart. I've seen people do it and actually help people put together sites to do it through WordPress. But that takes a little bit more knowledge, but it's still pretty simple. I can spin those things up in a day, where you essentially have a full running e-commerce website that you can add your inventory to and add your t-shirts to that, and have it linked to PayPal. So you've got your payment system, and it's WordPress. So it's super SEO or search engine optimized, super search engine optimized friendly, super SEO friendly. That sentence doesn't make sense when you spell it out, but you're ready to go in terms of keyword efficiencies that you need to make sure that you can get found in search engines, because there's a ton of t-shirt sites out there. Then you got to figure out how you're going to market it, because you got to get some kind of user base going. You got to get people buying them. It could be that you're doing it viral and you're doing it local, what do they call it? Like grassroots. So you're actually promoting it locally and maybe local events, or you get some cheap business cards made. Incidentally, I just had some made for this podcast, to advertise this podcast, and it was just $25 for 500 and a pretty basic design, and a nice quality glossy card stock or whatever. You could advertise the business. Maybe that's all you do to start, is just to pass out the cards, and you just get people going directly to your website, to just kind of complete the transaction. Maybe you've got some samples. You go to local carnivals, or not carnivals, fairs. I don't think a carnival is the best place. Oh, maybe, who knows? But a fair, craft fair I'm thinking of, or some kind of seller's market type place where you can hang them and people can walk through and see a booth and buy your t-shirts. That could be one option. If you do really well at getting your website optimized to show up in search on Google, then you just have built your big channel, your organic channel as I call it. So you've got traffic coming through your website, purchasing your t-shirts, but you just go that's just kind of the beginning, because what ends up happening is you got to kind of start to plan out, what do I do to handle the inventory? Because you can't just assume you're going to sell 1,000, and you can't necessarily have the cash flow right away to buy 1,000. So you got to figure out a way to plan. And plus, if you're doing multiple designs, and let's say you've got 20 designs, which you think, well, that's not a lot, and maybe that's not enough. You look at some of these major t-shirt companies, they've got hundreds of designs, but you got to consider, for every one of those designs, do you have a process in place to fulfill the order fast enough? So if somebody does, say you have an option to have it be like 2-day delivery for a t-shirt, because somebody wants it in 2 days, like, are you gonna have the process set up so that you can actually get it made and delivered to a person in 2 days? So that's where the inventory question comes into place. Like, how much do you hold in inventory? Do you have one of every t-shirt, because you figure you're going to sell about one of every t-shirt a month, or at the very least in the course of 12 months, you figure you'd sell at least one of every t-shirt. So you'd initially purchase just one of each, but then you don't get the efficiencies of buying in bulk. So, you got to consider, a lot of times those discounts are for 100 So can you afford to buy 100? Like a lot of these little things that you got to think about, that I think people don't think about when they think of these side hustles and getting these side hustles started. So what I'd recommend in this scenario is to start off small. And if you come up with 10 solid ideas and you buy a domain for $12 through Google Domains or $15 through some other place at the most, you really shouldn't pay more than 10 or $12 for a domain, knowing that Google Domains are $12. Buy your domain. That's your initial cost. You get your setup for hosting, which could be $5 a month, give or take. I mean, you could probably get up with hosting. If you did everything through GoDaddy, you could probably spend about $100 and be up running for the first year with hosting and a WordPress site. Maybe even less. Maybe it's like 60. I don't know. I wouldn't go that route because I obviously build websites myself. But if you're new to the game, you could probably do this through GoDaddy and get a lot of the help through the system that GoDaddy provides. But essentially, you get a site set up, but you got to find a theme. But you can find free themes. You can find free themes through WordPress. You could find themes through like Theme Forest. But you essentially get your site set up. You got something to sell through. You got a channel, and just do 10 solid designs, and you can stock up on those 10. Now you figure, maybe that is like $400 or $500 upfront costs, but that's what you need to get off the ground. And then maybe you just do something through viral. So you just buy Facebook ads, or you pay for Twitter, through Twitter to promote your tweets, which just sounds like a tongue twister. But find cheap ways to advertise. Essentially, use word of mouth. Have the business cards made up. Maybe with promoting with pictures, a couple designs on the business card. Get that out there. Hand them out to people. Give them away for free. Maybe it's worth taking a hit of your inventory, which could be $200 worth of inventory, and just hand it out for free. But along with a business card, or with the caveat that the person gets that t-shirt for free, but the t-shirt has your logo or your marketing reference, so that it links back to you somehow to help drive business back to your website. I would say you're trying to build this brand, and I think that's the last part of this puzzle is to build a brand around your t-shirt business, or whatever your business is, even your antique business, or you're selling random clearance crap business. You're essentially trying to build that brand so that there's some level of brand recognition that you're going to be able to continue into the future, having customers that are just going to come through virally, organically, without having to do a lot of marketing in a traditional sense, and without having to buy ads. But even paying for Google AdWords, you can pay for ads to show up in the search engine results, but that can get out of hand, and that can get expensive really quick if you're not careful and you don't know what you're doing. I'd say do some research in it, and definitely put caps. Definitely put spending limits on anything that you do, even on Twitter or Facebook. Say, I'm only willing to spend $50 a day. And you figure out right away how to put that spending limit on there, because it will eat through your budget faster than you can even blink. You could potentially, if you don't do it correctly, blow through $50 in a minute with the way that online advertising works. So you definitely want to be conscious of that and aware of that, and think through some kind of strategy for handling that. But that is an option for a side hustle, probably one of the more complicated ones. You might want to just start off with going to tag sales and buying stuff for $5 and trying to sell it for $25 on Etsy. But that's up to you. So I wanted to share this information with the listeners, with you guys who are listening right now. and I appreciate you listening again. This is Finding Your Identity. If you didn't remember from when I mentioned that this was Finding Your Identity when this first started, I am still trying to work with the Secret Service, FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, all those big departments to track people down who are not listening. I'm still trying to figure out a game plan for that. Right now, that's my side hustle. Figure out who's not listening so I could find you and make you listen, and then cross you off the list and then move down the list to get more listeners. But we also have our Twitter account, which is FY_identity, which is a way to actually reach out to us. So you can comment on the episodes or provide feedback. I do want to start talking to other people to find out ideas for the show, or to find people who may be interested in being interviewed or coming on to the show to talk and tell their stories about how they found their identity. We also have YouTube, which is Finding Your Identity Podcast, which you can watch some of the videos. This is being recorded right now as we speak when I'm recording, with a little bit of an unedited feel to the videos. You can kind of see some behind the scenes. Like, I'll hit stop on this and thank everybody, and then I'll just throw in a joke or something, or say something just insensitive, politically incorrect, but you wouldn't know because you're just listening to the podcast. You're not watching the video. So I kid. But thanks again for listening to Find Your Identity. And until next time, I'm signing off. And I'm tired. I don't really have a joke or something politically insensitive to say. So, sorry. It's the 10th episode. So I'm starting to feel the pressure. Yeah. For these YouTube people. For you 2 people who are watching this video right now or ever. Thanks.